a pie, a porch, a man who had forgotten how to expect good things. Except this time, it wasn't a pie. It was a telegram. And the man wasn't the one who'd forgotten. He was the one who'd been lying, quietly and thoroughly, to an entire town, and to himself most of all. And the woman who caught him wasn't supposed to be there. The telegraph office wouldn't hire a woman. Everyone in Harlan Creek knew that. Margaret Elspeth Cord knew it better than anyone, because she had asked 3 times, and been told 3 times, in tones of patient condescension that she could still hear when the room got quiet enough. But here is what else is true. She was there anyway. She was there on the morning of the 14th of November, 1887, when the wire came in, and she was the only one in the room who understood what it meant. And everything that followed, the revelation, the reckoning, the particular silence of a man confronting the distance between who he'd been and who he still had time to become. All of it turned on that one morning, on a woman who wasn't supposed to be there, on a lie that wasn't supposed to surface, on the strange, unhurried mercy that sometimes arrives wearing the face of accountability. I have told a lot of stories in my time, stories about stubbornness and second chances and the long way around to something good. This one is about all 3, but mostly it is about what happens when you stop measuring yourself by the wrong thing. It starts, as most things in Harlan Creek started, with the weather and a death and a vacancy that nobody quite knew how to fill. The telegraph office sat at the east end of Harlan Creek's main street, wedged between the land surveyor's office and a millinery shop whose owner, Mrs. Dottie Frayne, had strong opinions about everything within a 3-block radius and was not shy about sharing them. The telegraph office was a narrow, serious building, all dark wood and the smell of machine oil and the faint metallic tang of a wire that had been carrying the weight of human urgency for going on 12 years. It had been run, for most of those 12 years, by a man named Cuthbert Hoole, who was precise and methodical and completely without warmth, which made him excellent at the job and not much fun at supper. Cuthbert Hoole died in September of 1887, which was a hard month for deaths, the valley not yet cooled from summer and the ground still stubborn. He left behind a tidy office, a well-maintained instrument, and a vacancy that the Harlan Creek Postal and Telegraph Authority, which was really just a regional superintendent named Gerald Foss, who came through every 6 weeks on a circuit, needed to fill before the winter traffic picked up. There were 2 candidates, as far as anyone in town was aware. The first was a young man named Douglas Pell, 23 years old, the son of the hardware merchant, who had learned telegraphy at a school in the city and come home with a certificate and a certain self-satisfied air that the certificate perhaps entitled him to. He was capable enough. He was also the kind of capable that knows it is capable, which is a different and somewhat more exhausting thing. The second candidate was not, strictly speaking, a candidate at all, because Gerald Foss had made it plain that the Harlan Creek office was not the place for experimentation, by which he meant a woman, by which he meant Margaret Cord, who had applied anyway and been declined with a form letter that she suspected Gerald Foss had prepared in advance for exactly this purpose. So ready had it arrived. Margaret Cord was 31 years old, which in Harlan Creek in 1887 carried the particular social weight of a woman who had not yet married and was now perhaps unlikely to. A judgment that the town made with the brisk efficiency of a community that had assigned everyone their category and found the uncategorized vaguely unsettling. She had been married, in fact, briefly and well, to a man named Thomas Cord who had died of a fever 4 years prior, leaving her the small house on Birch Street, a modest inheritance that was running modestly thin, and a grief that she had processed with the same thorough, unhurried attention she gave to everything else. She was not bitter about Thomas. She was not bitter about much. She was, however, precise, and she had learned telegraphy from Thomas himself, who had operated a small private wire for a mining concern 2 counties over, and who had believed, with the cheerful certainty of a man who loved his wife completely, that there was no reason she shouldn't know everything he knew. She was better at it than he had been. He had told her so himself, with considerable pride and no apparent wounded feelings, which was one of the many reasons she had loved him. So when Cuthbert Hoole died and the vacancy opened, Margaret applied. She was declined. She applied again, with a letter that laid out her qualifications in plain, numbered sequence. She was declined again, with a letter that acknowledged her qualifications and declined her anyway. She applied a 3rd time, with a letter so precise and unanswerable in its logic that Gerald Foss, she later learned, had read it 3 times and then set it aside and written her a 3rd refusal. Because the logic of a thing and the doing of a thing were, in Gerald Foss's experience, two separate matters entirely. Douglas Pell was appointed in October. He began work the first week of November. He was, by all accounts, competent enough. He was also, it would emerge, something else besides. Margaret did not stop going to the telegraph office. She had no official reason to be there. She had in fact been told, with polite firmness, that her assistance was not required. But Harlan Creek was a small town, and the telegraph office was a public building, and she had a legitimate reason to receive messages, and she had, over the years of Thomas's work and her own study, developed the kind of relationship with a Morse instrument that a person develops with a language learned young. It was simply how she heard things. She could not sit in the waiting area of the telegraph office, with its one wooden bench and its smell of machine oil, and not hear the wire. It was not eavesdropping, it was simply listening. And she was very good at listening. Douglas Pell was aware of her. He was not pleased by her awareness of him. He was a young man who had come home with a certificate and an appointment and a certain picture of himself that Margaret's presence, quiet and attentive, and clearly comprehending every click and pause of the instrument, complicated in ways he could not quite articulate, and therefore addressed by ignoring her as thoroughly as possible. He was polite. He was not warm. He answered her questions about messages addressed to her with the minimum of information and the maximum of professional distance. She accepted this without complaint. She sat on the bench. She listened. She said good morning when she arrived, and good afternoon when she left. He said the same, in a tone that suggested he was fulfilling a contractual obligation. This went on for 3 weeks, which brings us to the 14th of November. The morning was cold, the first real cold of the season, the kind that arrives overnight and makes the previous day seem like a memory from another life. Margaret walked to the telegraph office at her usual time, which was mid-morning, when the first round of business traffic had settled and the wire was quieter. She sat down on the bench. Douglas Pell was at the instrument, copying a message in his neat, schooled hand. She listened, as she always listened. And then, approximately 10 minutes into her sitting, a message came through that was not addressed to anyone in Harlan Creek. This was not unusual. The Harlan Creek office sat on a relay line, which meant that messages sometimes passed through it on their way to other stations, and the operator was required to receive them, log them, and retransmit. Douglas Pell received the message. Margaret, listening, heard it. She heard the destination code. She heard the sender's identification, and she heard the content, which was a financial instruction from a land speculation concern in the capital to their agent in the county seat, and which contained, embedded in its precise commercial language, a set of figures that did not match the figures that had been publicly stated in the Harlan Creek Gazette 2 weeks prior, regarding the assessed value of the Alderman Creek grazing parcel, which 3 families in the valley, the Holloways, the Birch brothers, and old Silas Pren, were in the process of selling, under the impression that the market value was what the Gazette had printed, which was what Douglas Pell had told the Gazette, because Douglas Pell's father, the hardware merchant, was a silent partner in the land concern, and the difference between the stated value and the actual value was considerable, and it was going somewhere that was not the Holloways, or the Birch brothers, or old Silas Pren. Margaret sat for a moment on the bench. She sat with the particular stillness of a woman who has just received a piece of information and is giving it the full, unhurried attention it deserves. Douglas Pell finished retransmitting the message and set down his pencil and turned to find her looking at him, not accusingly, not with anger, with the same calm, considering expression she always wore. He looked back. Something in his face shifted, a very small shift, the kind that only someone paying close attention would notice, a recalibration, a recognition that she had been listening and that she understood what she had heard. He said, "She didn't hear that correctly. She said she was quite sure she had." He said the wire was sometimes unclear, and the technical language of commercial transmissions was easy to misinterpret. She said she understood technical language well enough, he said. And here his voice took on a slightly different quality, flatter and more careful, that she might want to think carefully before she said anything to anyone, given that she had no official standing in this office, and her presence here was, strictly speaking, at his discretion. Margaret looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I have been sitting on this bench for 3 weeks, and I have been patient about a great many things. But I am not going to be patient about this." She stood up. She put on her coat. She said good morning, and she left. The next several hours were, by Margaret's own later account, the most clarifying of her adult life. which was saying something, given that the 4 years since Thomas's death had contained a fair amount of clarifying already. She walked home. She sat at her kitchen table. She thought about the Holloways, who had 3 children and a 4th coming, and who were selling the grazing parcel because the price seemed right and they needed the money for a larger house. She thought about the Birch brothers, who were old enough to know better but had trusted the printed figure because it was printed, which was the kind of trust that printed things commanded and perhaps shouldn't. She thought about Silas Pren, who was 72 and had worked that land for 40 years and deserved, at the very minimum, to know what it was actually worth. She thought about what she could do, which was limited by what she could prove, which was limited by the fact that she had no official standing, and Douglas Pell knew it. She thought about Gerald Foss, who was due in Harlan Creek in 11 days on his regular circuit, and who would find the transmission log and, if he looked carefully, the discrepancy between the retransmitted figures and the publicly stated ones. But 11 days was too long, because the sale was scheduled to close in 6. She thought about the county land office, which was in Millhaven, 20 miles east, and which kept its own records of assessed values, and which was open to the public, and which she could reach by the morning coach if she left tomorrow. She got up from the table. She packed a small bag. She wrote 3 letters, one to the Holloways, one to the Birch brothers, one to Silas Pren, informing them, in careful and precise language, that she had reason to believe the assessed value of the Alderman Creek parcel had been misstated in the public record, and that they should delay signing any documents until they had consulted the county land office directly. She did not accuse Douglas Pell by name. She did not need to. She delivered the letters herself that afternoon, in the cold that had settled over Harlan Creek like a considered judgment. Then she went home and made supper and went to bed and slept, as she always slept, thoroughly and without drama. She was on the morning coach at 6. Now, here is where I want to pause for a moment, because I have been telling stories long enough to know that this is the part where the story shifts, where it stops being about what Margaret did and starts being about what the doing of it cost her and what it opened up. And I want to make sure you are with me, because what comes next is the part that matters most. If you are listening from somewhere cold tonight, I hope you have something warm nearby. If you are listening from somewhere that has been asking too much of you lately, I hope this story gives you a few minutes of company. And if you have been sitting on a bench somewhere, listening to something you were told you had no right to hear, knowing something you were told you had no standing to know, stay with me, because Margaret is about to figure something out that took her entirely by surprise. The county land office in Millhaven was run by a man named Arthur Vane, who was 44 years old and had been the county land registrar for 11 years, and who was, in the way of people who have spent a decade doing careful, precise work in relative obscurity, exceptionally good at his job, and almost entirely unrecognized for it. He was a tall man, lean in the way of someone who forgot to eat when he was concentrating, with the kind of face that was not immediately remarkable but became, over time, a face you looked for in a room. He had been a widower for 6 years. His wife Clara had died of a fever, which was the same fever that had taken Thomas Cord 2 counties over, the same hard winter, and Arthur Vane had processed this loss with the same thorough, unhurried attention that Margaret had given hers, which is to say he had processed it completely and had then quietly concluded, without quite deciding, that a certain kind of happiness was no longer available to him, not out of self-pity, out of the particular arithmetic of a man who had counted up what he had and what he had lost, and arrived at a sum that seemed, if not exactly right, at least stable. He had his work, he had his office, he had his dog, a large, philosophically inclined hound named Burl, who slept under the registrar's desk and regarded the world with the patient skepticism of an animal who had seen a great deal of human decision-making and reserved his opinion. Margaret arrived at the land office at 10:30 on the morning of the 15th. She introduced herself. She stated her purpose, which was to verify the assessed value of the Alderman Creek grazing parcel in Harlan Creek. Arthur Vane looked at her for a moment, not the way Douglas Pell had looked at her, not with the flat calculation of a man measuring a threat, but with the focused attention of someone encountering a question that interested him. He said, "She could certainly verify that." He pulled the ledger. He showed her the figure. It was, as she had suspected, significantly higher than the figure that had appeared in the Gazette. He asked, with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that questions had consequences, how she had come to be inquiring. She told him. She told him precisely and completely, because precision was her habit and because she had decided, on the coach that morning, that there was no version of this that benefited from being partial. She told him about the bench, and the wire, and the transmission, and Douglas Pell, and the land concern, and the hardware merchant, and the 6-day window before the sale closed. She told him about the letters she had sent. She told him about the 3 times she had applied to the Telegraph office and been declined. She told him all of it, in the same even tone she used for everything, and when she was finished, Arthur Vane was quiet for a moment, and Burl, under the desk, lifted his head and looked at her with an expression that she later described as approval, though she acknowledged she might have been projecting. Arthur Vane said, "You did the right thing," she said. "I know," he said. "It took some courage," she said. "It took a coach ticket and a morning." He looked at her again with that focused attention. Then, almost despite himself, he smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that a person produces when they have been surprised by something and are not yet sure what to do about it. He said he would need to contact the county assessor and the land office in the capital, and that the sale would almost certainly need to be delayed pending review, and that she should expect that Douglas Pell and his father would not be pleased. She said she expected that. He said she might want to have the transmission log from the Telegraph office as supporting documentation. She said she had thought of that, and that Gerald Foss was due in Harlan Creek in 11 days, and that she had already written him a letter, which she produced from her coat pocket, already sealed. Arthur Vane took the letter. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said he would see that it was forwarded by the faster post. She thanked him. She stood up to leave. He said, and this was the line that neither of them understood yet, the line that would sit in the back of Margaret's mind for weeks and months and change its meaning gradually. The way a landscape changes meaning as you walk toward it, he said. "I'm glad you were on that bench," she said, without turning around. "So am I." Then she left. She caught the afternoon coach back. She arrived in Harlan Creek as the sun was going down, the cold sharper now, the mountains holding the last light with their usual indifference. She went home. She made tea. She sat in the chair by the window and thought about the day, which had been a significant day, and she allowed herself to feel, quietly and without announcement, that she had done a thing that needed doing, and that it had been done well. The weeks that followed were not comfortable. The sale was delayed, as Arthur Vane had said it would be. The county assessor sent a letter. Gerald Foss arrived 4 days early, which no one had anticipated, and spent 2 days in the Telegraph office going through the transmission logs with the focused unhappiness of a man who had signed a form letter declining a qualified applicant 3 times and was now confronting the consequences of that decision. Douglas Pell's father issued a statement through the Gazette that was long on indignation and short on specifics. Douglas Pell himself said very little, which was, under the circumstances, the wisest thing he had done since taking the job. The Holloways, the Birch brothers, and old Silas Prynne received revised assessments and, eventually, revised offers that reflected the actual value of the land. Silas Prynne, who was not a man given to public displays of feeling, stopped Margaret on the street one morning and held her hand in both of his for a long moment without saying anything, which said everything. Mrs. Dottie Frayne, who had strong opinions, had a great many of them about this situation and shared them freely, and they were, for once, entirely in Margaret's favor, which Margaret received with the same equanimity she received everything. The blunt shopkeeper, a man named Cass Hollis, who had been skeptical of Margaret's applications to the Telegraph office and had said so at the time, revised his position with the directness that characterized all his positions. He said he had been wrong and she had been right, and that was that. The cautious authority figure, which in this case was the town's justice of the peace, a careful man named Elbert Straw, said nothing publicly but was observed to nod at Margaret with a gravity that constituted, in Elbert Straw's vocabulary, high praise. Gerald Foss, to his credit, did the thing that needed doing. He wrote a formal letter to the Harlan Creek Postal and Telegraph Authority, recommending the appointment of Margaret Elspeth Cord as the interim telegraph operator of the Harlan Creek office, pending Douglas Pell's removal, which was pending the outcome of the county inquiry, which was pending several things that were all pending in the direction of Douglas Pell's considerable discomfort. The letter noted her qualifications, which were substantial, and her demonstrated competence, which was now a matter of public record, and did not mention the 3 previous refusals, which Margaret thought was perhaps the most diplomatic omission she had ever witnessed. She accepted the interim appointment. She moved her things into the office on a Tuesday in December, which was cold and bright and smelled of snow coming. Burl knew before Arthur Vane did. This is the thing about dogs. particularly dogs of the philosophical persuasion. They take in information without the interference of pride or self-protective reasoning, and they arrive at conclusions with a directness that their humans find, alternately, comforting and inconvenient. Burl had met Margaret once, for approximately 45 minutes, in the land office in Millhaven. He had lifted his head and looked at her with what Arthur Vane had described to himself, privately, as interest, which was notable because Burl did not, as a rule, show interest in people who came to the land office. He showed tolerance, and occasionally mild approval, and once, memorably, a brief display of enthusiasm for a man who had brought a meat pie to a boundary dispute, but interest was rarer. Arthur Vane had filed this observation in the part of his mind where he put things he was not ready to examine, which was a large and well-organized part of his mind. He had reason to return to Harlan Creek 3 times in the months that followed. The first time was in December, for the formal deposition regarding the transmission log. He saw Margaret at the telegraph office. She was already competent in the role in a way that was immediately apparent. The office had a different quality, a kind of organized aliveness it had not had under Cuthbert Hole, and had certainly not had under Douglas Pell. She showed him the relevant logs. They spoke about the case. She made coffee, which was strong and good, and he drank it without comment, and she did not ask if it was to his liking, which he found, for reasons he did not immediately examine, refreshing. The second time was in February, for a boundary matter unrelated to the Pell case, which had by then resolved itself in the direction everyone had expected. He stopped at the telegraph office because he had a message to send to the capital, which was true, and not for any other reason, which was the kind of thing a man tells himself when the other reason is sitting in the part of his mind he hasn't gotten to yet. She received the message. She sent it efficiently. He waited on the bench, the same bench, he noted, where she had sat for 3 weeks, and Burl, who had come with him, walked directly to Margaret and sat down next to her feet with the calm authority of a dog who has decided something and is not interested in debate. She looked down at him. She looked up at Arthur. She said, "Is he always like this?" Arthur said, "No." She said, "Should I be concerned?" He said, "I don't think so." Burl wagged once and settled. They were both quiet for a moment, and the wire ticked in the background, and the mountains outside the window did what they always did. The third time was in March, and it was not for official business. He told himself it was, because he had a land transfer document that needed to be transmitted, which was true, but the land transfer document could have waited, and he knew it, and he made the 20-mile trip anyway, and Burl looked at him from the back of the wagon with an expression that communicated, without ambiguity, that the dog had been aware of the real reason for some time, and was pleased that Arthur was catching up. They fell into a habit, which is the way it always happens when 2 people are too careful to fall into anything faster. He came through Harlan Creek on the first Friday of every month for the land office circuit. He stopped at the telegraph office. She made coffee. They talked about the cases he was working, the transmissions she was managing, the state of the county land records, which were, in Margaret's considered opinion, not organized as well as they could be. An opinion she delivered without softening, and which Arthur received without offense, because she was right, and because he had. Over the course of 3 visits and a number of letters, they had begun corresponding about official matters, which was entirely professional and not for any other reason. Come to understand that Margaret Cord said true things simply, and that this was not a habit to be managed, but a quality to be grateful for. He thought about her between visits. He was aware that he thought about her, and he filed this awareness in the usual part of his mind, and the part of his mind was getting crowded. And Burl, who slept at the foot of his bed, had taken to looking at him in the mornings with an expression of patient exasperation, as if to say, "We both know what is happening here, and I am waiting for you to catch up." The habit of the first Friday became by summer the habit of the first and third Friday, which Arthur explained to himself as an expansion of the circuit that was necessitated by increased land transfer activity in the Harlan Creek area, which was true in a technical sense and also not the point. Margaret, who was perceptive and had been perceptive since childhood and had spent 4 years paying close attention to everything, was aware of what was happening. She was also aware that Arthur was not yet aware, or was aware, and had not yet decided what to do with the awareness, which was the same thing in practical terms. She was patient. She had always been patient. She had learned telegraphy, after all, which is the art of waiting for a signal and knowing, when it comes, exactly what it means. It was Dottie Frayne who said it out loud first. because Dottie Frayne said everything out loud first, and because she had been watching the first and third Friday visits with the focused interest of a woman who had assigned herself the role of social chronicler and took the responsibility seriously. She said to Margaret, on a Wednesday in July, while examining a bolt of blue wool in the millinery shop, "That land registrar comes through here a good deal more than the circuit requires." Margaret said, "He has business here." Dottie said, "He has a very particular kind of business here, and it walks through your door every other Friday." Margaret said she was sure she didn't know what Dottie meant. Dottie said, with the serene confidence of a woman who always knew what she meant, "Yes, you do." Margaret did know. She walked home from the millinery shop in the July heat and sat at the kitchen table and thought about it, which was her way. She thought about Arthur Vane, who was careful and precise and quietly decent, who laughed at the right moments and not at the wrong ones, who had looked at her on that first morning in Millhaven with the focused attention of a man encountering a question that interested him and had not looked away since. She thought about Thomas, who had been gone 4 years and who had loved her so completely that the losing of him had been, for a long time, the largest fact of her life. She thought about what Thomas would say if she asked him. She knew, of course, what he would say. He would say, "Maggie, you are the most thorough person I have ever known, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. But there are times when thorough and slow are not the same thing, and this is one of them." He would have said it with the cheerful certainty of a man who loved her completely. She sat with this for a while. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the mountains held the summer heat with the same indifference they held everything. She thought, "I have been operating under a set of assumptions that need revision." She thought, "Thomas would be laughing at me right now." She thought, "He would not be wrong." She got up from the table. She put on her coat, which was unnecessary in July but was a habit when she was thinking. She went for a walk. She walked to the end of Birch Street and back, twice, and by the time she had returned she had arrived at a conclusion, which she examined from several angles and found sound, and which she set aside to act on when the moment was appropriate, because Margaret Cord did not do things until she was ready, and she was not quite ready yet, but she was close. The moment came on the third Friday of August. Arthur arrived at his usual time. She made coffee. They talked about a boundary dispute in the south of the county that had been generating paperwork for 3 months. He drank his coffee, and she drank hers, and Burl lay under the instrument table with his chin on his paws, and the wire ticked quietly, and the afternoon light came through the window in the particular way it came in August, thick and golden and not long for the season. There was a pause in the conversation. Arthur said, into the pause, in the careful voice of a man who has been thinking about something for a long time and has decided, today, to say it. "I find myself looking forward to Fridays considerably more than is strictly professional." Margaret looked at him. She said, "I know." He said, "I thought you might." She said, "I have been waiting for you to say it." He said, "How long?" She said, "Since February, when Burl sat at my feet." He looked at Burl, who did not look up, but whose tail moved once, slowly, in the manner of a dog confirming a fact he has known for some time. Arthur looked back at Margaret. He said, with the careful, almost formal reasoning of a man who had been doing arithmetic for 6 years and had just discovered he had been using the wrong units. "I think I have been telling myself a story about what is available to me that may not be accurate," she said. "I think that is very likely," he said. "I would like to revise it," she said. "I think you should." The mountains outside the window did what they always did. The wire ticked. Burl sighed, a long and deeply satisfied sigh, and put his chin back on his paws. They were married in October, which was the right month for it. The valley turned gold and red, and the air sharp with the first real cold, the kind that made everything clear. It was a small wedding, which suited both of them. Silas Pren came and stood in the back and held his hat in both hands and said nothing, which said everything. Dottie Frayne cried, which surprised no one. Cass Hollis, the blunt shopkeeper, said, "Well, it took long enough," which was both accurate and, coming from Cass, a form of blessing. Elbert Straw, the justice of the peace, officiated and nodded with great gravity throughout, which was, in Elbert Straw's vocabulary, joy. Gerald Foss, who had made the trip from the capital for reasons he described as administrative and which were obviously personal, shook Margaret's hand after the ceremony and said, with the slightly pained sincerity of a man making a long overdue acknowledgement, "I should have hired you the first time," she said. "Yes," he said, "I'm sorry," she said. I know. It was the most efficient apology she had ever accepted. Arthur moved to Harlan Creek, which required some administrative reorganization of the county land circuit, and which he managed with the thorough, unhurried competence that characterized everything he did. He kept an office in Millhaven 2 days a week and spent the rest of his time in the small house on Birch Street, which expanded over the following years, first by a room, and then by another room, and then by a small person named Thomas, after the man who had taught Margaret telegraphy and believed she could learn everything he knew, and then by another small person named Clara, after the woman Arthur had loved and lost and would always love, which Margaret understood completely, because she was the kind of woman who understood that love was not a finite resource, and that honoring the past was not the same as refusing the future. Burl lived to be 14, which is a good long life for a dog, and spent his last years under the telegraph table in the Harlan Creek office, which Margaret had arranged specially, a blanket in the corner, a water bowl, a spot where the afternoon light came in. He died on a Tuesday in spring, peacefully and in his sleep, and Arthur sat with him for a long time afterward and said nothing, and Margaret sat next to Arthur and said nothing, and the wire ticked, and outside the mountains held the morning with their usual patience. The Harlan Creek Postal and Telegraph Authority, some years later, formally designated Margaret Cord Vane as the permanent operator of the Harlan Creek Telegraph Office, with full salary and standing, in a letter that was 3 sentences long and did not mention the 3 previous refusals. She framed the letter and hung it next to the instrument, not out of bitterness, but out of the particular satisfaction of a woman who had known something was right and had waited for the world to catch up. On the wall beside it, in a small frame, was a piece of paper on which she had written, in her precise and even hand, a single exchange. It read, "I'm glad you were on that bench," and below it, "So am I." She had written it down the day after she returned from Millhaven, in November of 1887, not because she knew then what it would mean, but because it had felt like something worth keeping. By the time the children were old enough to ask about it, she could tell them exactly what it meant, and why the answer was the most important thing she had ever said in a room she wasn't supposed to be in. Here is what Margaret Cord got wrong, for most of her life, and what I want to name plainly, because I think it is the kind of error that is easy to make and hard to see from the inside. She believed that standing, official standing, sanctioned standing, the kind conferred by a certificate or an appointment or a form letter with a yes instead of a no, was the precondition for contribution. She believed that if the authority did not recognize her right to be somewhere, then her presence there was provisional, contingent, a matter of tolerance rather than right. And there is a grain of truth in that fear. The world does withhold standing from people who deserve it. Gerald Foss's form letter was real. The 3 refusals were real. The bench she sat on was a bench she was allowed to sit on only because no one had yet thought to ask her to leave. All of that was real, and it mattered, and I do not want to suggest that the injustice of it was small. But here is what she was measuring wrong. She was measuring her right to act by the permission she had been given, when the thing that actually mattered was the thing she knew. She knew the wire, she knew the figures, she knew what the transmission meant, and none of that knowledge required a certificate. It required only that she be present, and listening, and willing to do something with what she heard. The bench she was allowed to sit on was the bench that changed 3 families' lives. The office she wasn't supposed to be in was the office where everything turned. The standing she had been denied was not the standing that was required. What was required was the standing she had always had. The standing of a person who knows a true thing and is willing to say it. I have told a lot of stories in my time, and the one that stays with me, the one I come back to, is the story of a person who had everything they needed and spent years believing they were waiting for permission. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you have been sitting on a bench somewhere, listening to something that matters, waiting for someone to hand you the credential that makes your listening official. Maybe you have been measuring your right to speak by the number of times you have been told to be quiet. Maybe you have done the arithmetic of your own life and arrived at a sum that seems stable, if not quite right, and told yourself that stable is enough. Don't let the arithmetic stop you. The figures you have been given may not be the actual value. The assessment may have been made by someone with interests that are not yours, using a metric that was never designed to measure what you actually have. You were on that bench for a reason. You heard what you heard for a reason. The thing that needed doing needed someone who knew how to do it, and you were there, and you knew. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Margaret Cord walked into an office she wasn't supposed to be in, sat on a bench she was barely permitted to occupy, and listened with the full attention of a woman who had spent years learning how to hear. And the wire spoke, and she understood, and she did something about it, and the doing of it opened a door she hadn't known she was standing in front of. It did not open the door by making her officially sanctioned. It opened the door by making her undeniably present. There is a difference. The world will sometimes take a long time to catch up to the difference, but it does catch up. Gerald Foss catches up. Cass Hollis catches up. Even the form letters catch up, eventually, 3 sentences long, with no mention of the previous refusals. I am glad you were on that bench. So am I. That is the line that started as a courtesy and ended as a covenant. That is the line that started as a stranger's acknowledgement and ended as a husband's daily truth. Said in the morning over coffee. Said in the evening when the children were in bed. Said with the particular warmth of 2 people who have both, in their different ways, spent time believing that a certain kind of happiness was no longer available to them, and who have both, in the end, been wrong about that in the best possible way. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Thank you for the attention you brought to this story, which is the most generous thing one person can give another, and which I do not take lightly. Wherever you are listening from, I hope you are warm. I hope there is something good waiting for you, something you perhaps haven't let yourself expect yet. I hope you will let yourself expect it, and I hope that the next time someone tells you that you have no standing to be somewhere, you will sit down on the bench anyway, and listen, and trust what you hear. Until next time, keep the wire open.